During a lakeside family retreat, my older sister insisted I surrender my $80,000 consulting payout to save her boutique, threatening to banish me if I declined. So, I grabbed my duffel bag and replied, "Consider me gone." My sister Natalie practically tossed a $32,000 overdue commercial lease notice onto the patio table. It slid across the glass, stopping right next to my coffee mug. The paper was covered in red ink, penalty fee after penalty fee, culminating in a final eviction warning for her retail space. She sat back in her wicker chair and offered a simple ultimatum: drain my savings to bail out her business, or lose my family forever. "It's just until holiday sales pick up," she said, her voice dripping with that practiced, fragile victimhood she always used to get her way. Her husband Derek leaned against the porch railing and crossed his arms. He was wearing a fleece vest that probably cost more than my first car. "Don't ruin the weekend. Priya, you say no, and you're dead to us." I glanced around the rented Tahoe cabin. The morning air smelled like pine needles and expensive sunscreen. My mother, Helen, stirred her iced tea, refusing to meet my eyes. The ice clinked against the glass, loud in the tense silence. My father, Arthur, just stared out at the water, his jaw set. The jury had already convicted me. Natalie had leased that downtown storefront 8 months ago. I remembered the launch party perfectly. She had hired a photographer, rented a champagne wall, and posted a gallery of photos with the caption, "Self-made CEO." Just 3 days before this trip, we were sitting in my kitchen, and she had mocked my remote tech job as glorified data entry. Now, her self-made debt was my problem. "Why would I pay your commercial lease?" I asked. Natalie looked genuinely offended. She blinked, her mouth falling open slightly. "Because you have liquid cash," my mother snapped, finally looking up. "Priya, she has overhead. And she has Derek." "Derek has been networking for 3 years," I pointed out, staring right at him. "He quit his firm because they asked him to work Fridays." "Watch your mouth," my father barked, turning away from the lake. "Your attitude is unacceptable." "My attitude? What about this extortion?" For my entire adult life, they called me the easy one, the boring one who didn't take risks. I went to a state school, got a safe job, saved my money, and lived quietly. They never acknowledged that my boring money paid for mom's knee surgery when her insurance lapsed. They never mentioned that I covered dad's massive plumbing disaster 2 winters ago. I even paid the deposit for Natalie's destination wedding because Derek's credit card was maxed out. "We share our success," Natalie stated, adjusting her sunglasses on top of her head. "No, you share my success," I corrected. Derek gave a cruel, sharp laugh. "Make your choice. Fund the shop, or we block your number." They sat there expecting me to cave. They always expected me to cave, because for 30 years, I had chosen keeping the peace over keeping my self-respect. I looked at the eviction notice, then at my mother, who was already reaching out to pat Natalie's hand in comfort. I stood up and zipped up my bag. The heavy canvas rasped loudly. "Consider me gone," my mother gasped. "Priya, stop throwing a tantrum." I didn't answer. I didn't look back. I just walked straight to my car, my boots crunching on the gravel driveway, got in, and drove the 5 hours back to Seattle in complete silence. 2 days later, the real nightmare started. I was standing in line at a neighborhood grocery store. It was a normal Tuesday. I had a basket with coffee beans, spinach, and a carton of milk. I slid my card into the reader. The machine beeped, a sharp, angry sound. The cashier, a college kid whose name tag read Imogen, handed the card back to me with a sympathetic wince. "Declined," she said quietly. I frowned. I knew exactly what was in my checking account. The consulting payout alone meant I had well over 6 figures sitting in liquid cash. "That has to be an error," I said, pulling out my phone. I tapped into my banking app. The screen loaded, and a massive red banner spanned the top of my dashboard. Account frozen. Available balance, $0. I left the groceries at the register, walked out into the Seattle drizzle, and dialed my bank immediately. After 20 minutes of holding music, a fraud specialist named Anthony answered. "Miss Delacroix," Anthony said, his voice carrying that flat, bureaucratic weight that immediately makes your stomach drop. "There is an active levy on your accounts from the State Department of Revenue." "A levy?" I had overpaid my taxes last year. My accountant was meticulous. "There has to be a mistake," I said, leaning against the damp brick wall of the grocery store. "I don't owe the state anything. Your business owes $45,000 in unpaid state taxes, and the grace period expired," Anthony replied. My chest tightened. The street noise around me seemed to muffle. "I don't own a business." Anthony paused. I could hear him typing. "You are listed as the primary guarantor for Natalie's Chic Finds LLC. We received the incorporation documents directly from the state." I stopped breathing. The cold seeped through my jacket. "Can you email me those filings?" 3 minutes later, sitting in the driver's seat of my car, I opened the PDF Anthony sent. There it was. My social security number, my childhood home address, and a digital signature I never authorized. I stared at the screen, my mind racing backward, trying to figure out how she got the information. Then it hit me. The fireproof safe in my parents' master bedroom closet. My mother kept all our original birth certificates, old passports, and social security cards in there. Natalie had the combination. She always had it. I pulled a background credit check right there on my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the phone twice. The report loaded. It wasn't just the state taxes. There was an $80,000 business line of credit maxed out under my name. At noon, my phone rang. It was my mother. I answered, putting it on speaker. "You knew," I said. It wasn't a question. Her voice trembled, thick with tears. "Please, Priya, just let it go. If you report this, they'll seize her inventory. She'll be ruined." "She stole my identity," I said. I was shockingly calm. The anger had burned past white hot and turned into something cold and metallic in my chest. She was panicked. My mother cried. "You were being so stingy with your money. She just needed a bridge loan, and her credit wasn't good enough. You have perfect credit. It wasn't supposed to get this far." I heard a scuffling sound on the line, and then my father's rough baritone took over. "Listen to me," Arthur said. If you destroy your sister's life over paperwork, you will have no family left. Do you hear me? You will be alone. I'm already alone, I said, and hung up. Before I could even put the car in drive, an email popped up on my screen. It was from Derek. Subject line, think twice. The body of the email was one sentence. Check the collateral on that business loan before you call the cops. Genius. A cold dread washed over me, heavier than before. Collateral? What collateral did I even have? I rented my apartment. I leased my car. The only hard asset I had to my name was, oh God. I logged into the county assessor's portal. My grandfather had passed away 5 years ago. He left his small, rustic lakeside cabin, not the Tahoe rental, but a modest place in Oregon, to Natalie and me jointly. We were both on the deed. I searched the property records. There it was. A secondary mortgage filed 6 months ago, using my forged consent to borrow against our shared equity. The loan was for $120,000. They hadn't just stolen my credit. They had pawned my inheritance to fund her vanity project. Derek knew that if I burned the LLC down, the bank would foreclose on Grandpa's cabin. He was using my own property as a human shield. I stopped arguing. I stopped feeling sorry for myself. I drove home, sat down at my dining table, and started compiling. I exported the IP addresses from the state signature portal. I saved Derek's blackmail email. I printed my W-2s and pulled my passport travel logs, showing definitively that I was in Europe on a work trip the week the business was registered in Seattle. I printed out a spreadsheet detailing every single dollar I had ever gifted or loaned them over the past decade. I laid the paper trail out on my table. It was an undeniable, irrefutable map of fraud. I picked up my phone, opened our family group chat, and typed, "Thanks for the written confession, Derek." Then, I dialed the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I navigated the phone tree, waited on hold, and when an intake agent answered, I said exactly 4 words: "I'm reporting identity theft." The agent, a man who introduced himself as Jasper, was polite but clinical. He took down the details, the dollar amounts, the nature of the familial relationship. He gave me a case number. But what he said next chilled me. "Miss Delacroix, I need to be completely transparent with you," Jasper said, the line crackling slightly, "because this involves family members, shared assets, and a legitimate business front. Local law enforcement is going to look at this and call it a civil dispute. We will investigate the wire fraud and the forged signatures, but federal investigations take months, sometimes years. In the meantime, the banks consider you liable. Your accounts will remain frozen until a judge orders otherwise. So what do I do?" I asked, staring at the mountain of paper on my table. "You need a lawyer. Today, someone who specializes in commercial fraud. You need to file for emergency injunctions, or your sister is going to keep bleeding you dry." I spent the next 3 hours calling every law firm in the city until I found a commercial litigator named Caden, who agreed to see me on short notice. I packed up my binders and took an Uber to his office downtown, paying with a backup credit card I had hidden in a drawer years ago. Caden was sharp, wearing a dark suit without a tie, his desk covered in legal pads. He listened to my story, looked at the documents, and didn't offer any fake sympathy. He just started taking notes. "The mortgage on the cabin is the real problem," Caden said, tapping his pen. "If we freeze the LLC's assets, the business defaults on the loan. The bank seizes the cabin. Your sister loses it, but so do you." "I don't care about the cabin anymore," I said. "I care about clearing my name." "Good, because it's worse than you think." Caden turned his monitor around. He had just run a deeper search on Natalie's Chic Finds LLC using his firm's software. "Your sister didn't just max out a line of credit," Caden explained, pointing to a red flag on the screen. 2 weeks ago, she signed a massive purchase order with a regional supplier for holiday inventory. High-end ceramics, textiles, imports, a company owned by a woman named Sable. Natalie paid a 10% deposit and signed a personal guarantee for the rest. Using my name, I guessed, feeling sick. "Yes, and the check for the deposit bounced 3 days ago. Sable's company is out $50,000 in shipped product, and they are coming after the guarantor." I left Caden's office with a retainer agreement and a migraine that felt like a nail driven through my skull. The rain had picked up, turning the Seattle streets into slick, gray mirrors. I finally made it back to my apartment building just after 6 in the evening. I walked into the lobby, exhausted, just wanting to take a hot shower and sleep. "Priya Delacroix?" I turned. A man in a beige raincoat was standing by the mailboxes. He looked entirely unremarkable, holding a thick manila envelope. "Yes?" I said before my exhausted brain could catch up to the warning signs. "I'm Crispin. I have some documents for you." He stepped forward, pressed the envelope against my chest, and stepped back. "You've been served." He walked out the glass doors before I could even say a word. I looked down at the envelope. I tore it open in the elevator. It was a civil lawsuit from Sable's supply company. They were suing me for breach of contract, fraud, and damages totaling over $70,000. But that wasn't the part that made my blood run cold. Attached to the lawsuit was a printed email chain used as an exhibit. It was an email from Derek to Sable's lawyers, sent yesterday. "If you're looking for the guarantor," Derek had written, "you should know she's trying to hide assets. Here is her home address, her employer's contact information, and her personal cell. Don't let her play the victim. They weren't just stealing from me anymore. They were actively feeding me to the wolves to buy themselves time." I stood in the lobby, the damp paper trembling in my hands. I read Derek's email again, her employer's contact information. I pulled out my phone and immediately forwarded the photos of the lawsuit to Caden. My hands were shaking so badly I had to retype his email address 3 times. I didn't wait for a reply. I just walked to the elevator, rode it up to the 4th floor, and locked my deadbolt behind me. I didn't sleep. I sat on my sofa in the dark, watching the streetlights cut through the blinds, running the math. My main accounts were frozen. I had exactly $4,200 left on the hidden backup credit card. My rent was due in 8 days. Caden's retainer had eaten $2,500. I had a half-empty fridge. And now, I had a $70,000 lawsuit. lawsuit. At 7:15 a.m. the next morning, my laptop pinged. It was an email from Arlo, the director of operations at my tech firm. The subject line was just my name. Priya, please call me on my cell before you log on for stand-up. My stomach dropped. I dialed his number. He answered on the first ring. Hey Arlo, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Priya, what is going on? He asked. He didn't sound angry, just deeply uncomfortable. HR just got a formal inquiry from a law firm representing a commercial supplier. They're asking to verify your employment and salary for a wage garnishment filing related to a business fraud case. I squeezed my eyes shut. Derek had actually done it. He hadn't just given them my info. He had painted me as a flight risk hiding assets, prompting Sable's lawyers to aggressively secure my wages before I even had a chance to defend myself. It's identity theft, Arlo, I said. My sister forged my signature to open an LLC and took out a massive line of credit. I'm working with a lawyer and the FBI. I can send you the case numbers. He exhaled slowly. Jesus, okay, send me everything you have. HR is legally obligated to respond to the inquiry, but if you have a police report, it buys us some time. But Priya, if a judge signs a garnishment order, our payroll system automatically complies. I can't stop it. I understand, I said. Take the day off, Arlo told me. Sort this out. I didn't take the day off to rest. I took it to go to war. I was at Caden's office at 9:00 a.m. sharp. He was already drinking black coffee and had the lawsuit spread out on his desk. They played dirty, Caden said, skipping the greeting. They're trying to drown you in legal fees so you'll drop the freeze on the LLC and just pay it to make it go away. They went after my job, I said, my voice hollow. Sable's lawyers contacted my HR department this morning. Caden's eyes narrowed. Good? Good? How is that good? Because it crosses the line from breach of contract into tortious interference and defamation, Caden explained, tapping his pen. Derek isn't a party to Sable's contract. He's a third party actively providing false information to damage your employment to protect himself. And he put it in writing. He pulled a legal pad toward him. Did you bring the IP addresses from the state portal? I slid the printed spreadsheet across the desk. I had pulled it from the digital signature verification log. 3 IP addresses were logged during the incorporation of Natalie's Chic Finds LLC and the signing of the $80,000 credit line. Caden typed the first IP into his laptop. Let's see who owns this network. A minute later, he looked up. Comcast Residential, registered to Arthur Delacroix, my dad. The signature was executed from my parents' house, the same house where my mother kept the fireproof safe. What about the second one? I asked, pointing to the log from the day the secondary mortgage on the cabin was signed. Caden typed it in. Spectrum Business Internet, registered to a co-working space downtown. He turned the screen toward me. It was the same co-working space Derek used for his networking. So we have them, I said. We have proof. We have circumstantial evidence of location, Caden corrected, which is enough for me to file a motion to dismiss Sable's lawsuit against you and countersue Derek and Natalie for fraud. But civil court is slow, Priya. We need a hammer to stop the bleeding right now. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from my mother. Natalie is in the hospital. She had a panic attack because her accounts are frozen and the landlord changed the locks on the shop. Are you happy now? You're destroying your sister over money. I stared at the screen. The absolute delusion of it. She wasn't in the hospital because of me. She was in the hospital because the reality of her own actions had finally caught up with her. And for the first time in 30 years, I wasn't writing a check to make it disappear. I didn't reply. I just slid the phone over to Caden so he could read it. He read the text and raised an eyebrow. Your parents are enabling this. They always have. I was the safety net. Natalie was the star. Well, the safety net is about to become a liability, Caden said. He grabbed a fresh sheet of paper. Here is the hammer. The secondary mortgage on the cabin. It's an FDIC-insured bank. That means bank fraud. That's a federal crime, not a state tax issue. He looked right at me. I can draft a formal declaration of forgery and submit it directly to the bank's fraud department. The moment they realize they hold a fraudulent mortgage, they won't wait for a civil trial. They will immediately call the loan due in full. If Natalie and Derek can't produce $120,000 in cash within 30 days, the bank forecloses on the cabin. And then they refer the file to the U.S. Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. Caden paused. But if I do this, you lose the cabin. It goes into foreclosure, your credit takes a temporary hit until we clear it, and your grandfather's property is gone. I thought about the cabin, the smell of the old cedar walls, the summers we spent on the dock. It was the only thing Grandpa left us. He had loved that place. But I also thought about Derek standing on the patio in Tahoe, laughing in my face, telling me I was dead to them. I thought about my mother calling me stingy while my sister stole my identity out of a fireproof safe. Do it, I said. Caden didn't hesitate. He started typing. I'll need you to sign an affidavit. I left his office at noon, the rain finally letting up. My phone was blowing up. 7 missed calls from my dad, 2 from Derek. They must have been trying to use the LLC debit cards for lunch or gas, only to find the federal freeze was absolute. I walked into a coffee shop to buy a sandwich with my backup credit card, carefully tracking the balance. As I waited for my order, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a family member. It was an unknown number from a 503 area code, Oregon. I answered it cautiously. Hello, Priya, it's Lachlan. I froze. Lachlan was the property manager who kept an eye on Grandpa's cabin during the off-season. He lived down the road and charged us a small yearly fee to check the pipes and clear the roof. I hadn't spoken to him in months, usually just sending him a check at the start of winter. Hi, Lachlan, I said, stepping away from the counter. Is everything okay with the cabin? That's why I'm calling. His voice was gravelly, hesitant. I was doing my drive-by this morning, and there's a crew out here. Contractors? Contractors? For what? They're tearing up the foundation on the south side, Lachlan said. I went over to ask what was going on, and the foreman showed me a work order, said the owners approved a major renovation, an addition. But Priya, they're using heavy machinery. If you guys didn't pull the right county permits for this slope, the county will red tag the whole property by Friday. I felt the blood drain from my my face. Lachlan, I didn't authorize any renovations. Well, somebody did, he replied, because there's a massive dumpster in the driveway, and a guy named Derek signed the contract. The foreman said he paid a $30,000 cash deposit. $30,000. The pieces slammed together in my head. The $120,000 mortgage against the cabin. The $80,000 line of credit. Natalie's boutique didn't need $200,000 to stay afloat. The boutique was failing, yes, but it was also a front. They hadn't just stolen my credit to buy high-end ceramics. They stole my credit to gut and flip my grandfather's cabin, probably to turn it into a luxury short-term rental to fund Derek's networking lifestyle. And they used the LLC as the piggy bank to launder the loan money into construction costs. Lachlan, I said, my voice eerily calm. Can you do me a favor? Can you take photos of the crew, the trucks, and the work order? Specifically the license plate of the foreman's truck. Sure thing, he said. You want me to tell them to stop? No, I said. Let them keep digging. I hung up and immediately called Caden back. We need to amend that affidavit, I told him as soon as he answered. They aren't just hiding assets. They're actively converting the stolen funds into an unpermitted construction project on the collateral property. I heard Caden suck in a breath. Wait, they're renovating the cabin with the fraudulent loan money? Yes, right now. Priya, Caden said, his voice dropping an octave. That takes this out of simple bank fraud and straight into wire fraud and money laundering. If they are moving money from the LLC to a third-party contractor across state lines to improve a property, he trailed off. What? I asked. It means Sable's lawsuit against you is about to be the least of our problems, Caden said. Because if the IRS catches wind of interstate money laundering before we file this disclosure, they won't just freeze the LLC. They will freeze every asset tied to the guarantor, including your retirement accounts. I looked out the window of the coffee shop. The Seattle gray felt heavier now. The backup credit card in my pocket felt like a ticking clock. Then, my phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Stop playing games, Priya. Drop the freeze. We know you talked to HR today. Don't make us call your CEO directly. Family helps family. I didn't block him. I needed the evidence. Instead, I took a screenshot of the text, forwarded it to Caden, and walked out into the rain. Let them call my CEO. Let them dig the foundation. They thought they were burying me, but they were just digging their own grave deeper. By the time I reached my apartment building, my coat was soaked through, clinging to my shoulders like lead. I swiped my fob at the glass entry door, the magnetic lock disengaging with a heavy clack. I just wanted to get upstairs, strip off the wet clothes, and sleep until the world made sense. But as I stepped into the lobby, I stopped. Sitting on the beige leather sofa by the mailboxes were my parents. My mother was wringing a damp tissue between her hands. My father was sitting rigidly, arms crossed, staring at the elevator bank. They must have driven straight up from Tahoe, skipping the last 2 days of their vacation just to ambush me. My mother looked up and saw me. Priya, she breathed, standing up quickly. She looked haggard, the dark circles under her eyes stark against her pale skin. I didn't move toward them. I just stood on the lobby mat, water dripping from my coat onto the polished tile. How did you get in here? A neighbor let us in, my father said, standing up to join her. He didn't sound apologetic. He sounded authoritative, using the exact tone he used when I was a teenager, caught missing curfew. We need to talk. Now, there is nothing to talk about, I said, keeping my voice low so the concierge wouldn't hear. Your daughter committed multiple felonies. Your son-in-law is trying to ruin my career. Go home. Don't speak to us like that, my father snapped, taking a step forward. We drove 5 hours in the rain to fix this. We have a solution. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a manila envelope. It looked sickeningly similar to the one the process server had shoved into my chest yesterday. He placed it on the glass coffee table between us. What is that? I asked, not moving. It's a legally binding promissory note, my mother said, her voice taking on a desperate, pleading edge. Derek had a lawyer draft it this morning. It protects everyone, Priya. It really does. I stared at her, then at the envelope. Curiosity, morbid and sharp, forced me to step closer. I opened the flap and pulled out a 3-page document. It was printed on thick, expensive paper. I scanned the first page. It was a retroactive authorization form. It essentially stated that I, Priya Delacroix, had fully authorized the creation of Natalie's Chic Finds LLC, the $80,000 credit line, and the $120,000 mortgage on the cabin. It completely absolved Natalie of identity theft. I flipped to the second page. The repayment plan. $500 a month? I read aloud, my voice echoing slightly in the empty lobby. I looked up at my father. She stole $200,000, put me on the hook for a $70,000 lawsuit, and she wants to pay me back $500 a month? It's what the boutique can afford right now, my mother said quickly. Once the holiday season is over, she can increase the payments. And look at the third page, Priya. She's giving you her half of the cabin. She's signing the deed completely over to you. A cold, bitter laugh forced its way out of my throat. I couldn't stop it. It was the laugh of someone watching a car crash in slow motion. She's giving me the cabin? I asked, looking right into my father's eyes. The cabin that she secretly took a massive mortgage out on? The cabin that she is currently having demolished by a construction crew she paid with bounced checks? My parents froze. My mother's mouth parted, but no sound came out. My father's rigid posture faltered for just a fraction of a second. They didn't know about the construction. Or if they did, they didn't know that I knew. I spoke to Lachlan this morning, I said, dropping the pages back onto the glass table. He sent me photos of the excavators tearing up the foundation. Derek didn't pull permits. The county is going to red tag the property by Friday. The bank is going to call the loan due. That cabin is gone, Dad. It's already gone. She didn't just steal my money. She destroyed Grandpa's legacy to build a luxury rental. That's a lie, my father said, but his voice lacked its usual booming certainty. Derek said they were just doing some minor roof repairs to increase the appraisal value. Derek is a liar, I said, my voice hardening. And Natalie is a thief. And you two are standing in my lobby trying to trick me into into signing a confession for a federal crime I didn't commit, just to keep your golden child out of prison. She's your sister. My mother sobbed, covering her face with her hands. If you don't sign this, she's going to lose everything. Derek said the FBI will raid the store. They'll take her inventory. She'll go to jail, Priya. Do you want your sister in a cell? I want my life back, I said. I picked up the promissory note, gripped the thick paper in both hands, and tore it in half. The sound was loud and satisfying. I stacked the halves and tore them again, then dropped the shredded pieces onto the glass table. Don't you ever come to my home again, I said. If you contact me again, I will have Caden add you to the harassment suit for witness tampering. You are no daughter of mine, my father said, his face turning a mottled red. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You are dead to this family. You hear me? We are done. You were done with me the moment you let her open that safe, I replied. I turned my back on them, walked to the elevator, and pressed the button. I didn't look back as the doors opened, and I didn't look back as they closed. The next morning, the hammer finally dropped. I was sitting at my kitchen island, eating a piece of dry toast, when my phone rang. It was Caden. The bank moved faster than I thought, he said, skipping the pleasantries. I submitted the affidavit of forgery yesterday afternoon, along with Lachlan's photos of the unpermitted demolition. Bank fraud departments don't mess around when their collateral is being actively destroyed. They froze the $120,000 construction account at 8:00 a.m. I put the toast down. What does that mean for the cabin? It means the money Derek was using to pay the contractors just vanished into thin air, Caden said. And because he didn't pull permits, the bank notified the county assessor. Lachlan was right. A stop work order was slapped on the gate an hour ago. My phone vibrated against my cheek. A call was coming in on the other line. I pulled the phone away and looked at the screen. It was an unknown number, Oregon area code. Hold on, Caden, I said. I'm getting a call from Oregon. Answer it, he said immediately. Merge the calls. Put it on speaker. Let me listen. I tapped the screen, merging the calls, and set the phone on the counter. Hello? Is this Priya Delacroix? A man's voice barked. He sounded furious, out of breath, like he was pacing. Yes, speaking. This is Thad. I own Apex Excavation out of Bend. I'm standing at your property on the lake, and the county just showed up and shut down my site. Not only that, but the cashier's check your brother-in-law gave me for the second milestone payment just bounced so hard it set off alarms at my credit union. I closed my eyes. The reality of it was staggering. Thad, I am so sorry, but I didn't hire you. My sister and her husband forged my signature on the property deed and the loan documents. The bank froze the accounts this morning because it's an active federal fraud investigation. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of a diesel engine idling in the background. A fraud investigation, Thad repeated, his voice dropping into a dangerous, quiet register. Yes, my lawyer Caden is on the line right now. Mr. Thad, Caden chimed in smoothly. I represent Miss Delacroix. The LLC that hired you is currently subject to a federal asset freeze. I highly recommend you pull your crews and your equipment off that mountain immediately and file a mechanic's lien against the LLC. A lien? Thad laughed, a harsh, grating sound. A lien doesn't pay my guys on Friday. A lien doesn't cover the diesel I burned hauling 3 excavators up this ridge. Derek told me he had the capital. He showed me the loan documents. The documents are forged, Caden reiterated patiently. Miss Delacroix is a victim of identity theft. Well, I'm a victim of a $30,000 deficit, Thad snapped. You tell Derek that if I don't get a wire transfer by tomorrow at noon, I'm not going to a lawyer. I'm going to drive to Seattle and rip the copper wiring out of his pretty little boutique to cover my losses. Have a nice day. The line went dead. I looked at the phone, then out the window at the Seattle skyline. Did you hear that? I heard a very angry creditor who is about to make Natalie's life miserable, Caden said calmly. But he's not our primary problem right now. Check your email. Arlo from HR just forwarded me something. I opened my laptop and pulled up my inbox. There was a message from Arlo, flagged with high importance. Attached was a letter from Sable's legal team, the supplier suing me for the $70,000 in bounced inventory checks. I opened the attachment. It wasn't a standard legal threat. It was a formal motion for an emergency ex parte wage garnishment, filed in King County Superior Court. They were petitioning a judge to immediately seize 40% of my gross paychecks, claiming I was a high-flight risk debtor, actively attempting to hide assets. And their primary evidence was an affidavit sworn and signed by Derek. The defendant, Priya Delacroix, has openly stated her intention to liquidate her bank accounts and flee the jurisdiction to avoid fulfilling her financial obligations to her creditors. Derek's sworn statement read, as her brother-in-law and business partner, I felt a moral obligation to report her intent. I stared at the words until they blurred. He had committed perjury. He had gone under oath and lied to a judge just to make sure Sable's lawyers locked up my paycheck before the FBI could unravel the LLC. He's doubling down, I said to Caden, my voice barely a whisper. He's panicking, Caden corrected. The boutique's accounts are frozen. The cabin renovation is dead. Thad the contractor is breathing down his neck. Derek needs cash, desperately. He thinks if Sable garnishes your wages, it buys the LC time to restructure or file for bankruptcy under your name before the federal hammer falls. Can they do this? Can a judge just take my paycheck based on his lie? If we don't file a counter motion by 4 p.m. today? Yes, Caden said. I need you to come to the office. We are filing an emergency motion for a protective order against Derek and Natalie, and we are dragging them into court for an evidentiary hearing. No more hiding behind emails. They are going to have to stand in front of a judge and explain why the IP addresses for their legitimate businesses match their parents' house. I closed the laptop. The fear that had been gripping my chest for 3 days slowly evaporated, replaced by a cold, absolute resolve. They wanted to play in the mud. They wanted to use the courts as a weapon. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said. When I arrived at Caden's office, the atmosphere was frantic. His paralegal, a A sharp-eyed woman named Luz was printing stacks of exhibits. Caden was pacing behind his desk, speaking rapidly into a headset. He held up a finger to me, signaling to wait. "No, Arlo, you have to hold the payroll file," Caden was saying. "If you process the garnishment before the judge rules on our protective order, my client loses her rent money. I am filing the motion electronically as we speak." He paused, listening. "I understand company policy, but this is active fraud. Give me until 3 p.m. He ripped the headset off and dropped it on the desk. "Your HR department is getting nervous," Caden said, looking at me. "Sable's lawyers are threatening to sue your employer for non-compliance if they don't process the garnishment today. So what do we do?" I asked, sitting down in the leather guest chair. "We go on the offensive," Caden said, sliding a thick document toward me. "This is a temporary restraining order and a motion for expedited discovery. But to get a judge to sign it today, we have to prove immediate, irreparable harm. We have to prove that Derek and Natalie are actively destroying evidence or continuing the fraud." He pointed to a tablet on his desk. "Luz has been monitoring the LLC's public filings and social media. Look at this." I picked up the tablet. It was Natalie's Instagram page, the one she used to promote Natalie's chic finds. The most recent post was uploaded 20 minutes ago. It was a video of Natalie standing inside her boutique. She looked perfect, hair blown out, makeup flawless, wearing a silk blouse. She was smiling at the camera, but there was a manic tightness around her eyes. "Hey everyone," she chirped in the video. "We are having a massive, unadvertised flash sale today. 50% off all high-end ceramics and imported textiles. Cash only. We are clearing inventory for a huge remodel. Come down to the shop before everything is gone." I felt my stomach turn over. "She's liquidating the stolen inventory," Caden said grimly. "Sable shipped her $50,000 worth of product. The LLC accounts are frozen by the FBI, so she can't process credit cards. So she's fire selling Sable's property for cash, right off the floor, and pocketing the physical money, which she'll use to pay Thad," I realized. "Or flee." "Exactly," Caden said. "She's fencing stolen goods in broad daylight. I need to get this to the judge immediately." He grabbed the tablet and headed for the door. "Stay here with Luz. Do not answer any calls." I sat in the quiet office for 2 hours. The ticking of the wall clock sounded like a metronome in my skull. I drank bad office coffee and watched the rain streak against the glass. I thought about the thousands of dollars I had freely given Natalie over the years, the wedding dress I helped pay for, the vacations I subsidized. It had never been enough. For a parasite, the host is only valuable as long as it bleeds. At 2:15 p.m., Caden walked back into the room. He didn't look triumphant. He looked exhausted. "Well?" I asked, standing up. "The judge granted the protective order," Caden said, dropping a stamped folder onto the desk. "The wage garnishment is halted. Your paycheck is safe." I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for a week. I sank back into the chair. "Thank God." "Don't celebrate yet," Caden warned, leaning against the edge of his desk. "The judge also ordered a mandatory evidentiary hearing for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. You, me, Sable's lawyers, and Derek and Natalie. Everyone has to appear." "Good," I said. "I want to look them in the eye." "There's a complication," Caden said softly. I looked up. "What kind of complication?" Caden ran a hand through his hair. "When the judge granted our motion, he issued an immediate injunction against the LLC, ordering Natalie to cease the cash liquidation sale. A King County Sheriff's deputy was dispatched to the boutique an hour ago to serve the order and lock the doors. And when the deputy arrived," Caden said, "the doors were already wide open. The store was completely empty. The inventory, the cash register, the display cases, everything was gone." I stared at him. "Gone? Like she sold it all?" "No," Caden said. "Like someone backed a box truck up to the loading dock and stripped the place down to the studs in under an hour." He paused, looking at his notes. "The deputy spoke to the landlord. The landlord said a crew of angry guys in work boots showed up, bypassed the electronic lock, and just started hauling boxes out. Said they were e-possessing the assets to cover a bounce check. Thad, the excavator from Oregon, hadn't waited for a wire transfer. He had driven up to Seattle and raided the boutique. So Thad stole Sable's inventory," I summarized, my head throbbing. "Yes," Caden said. "And because you are still the legal guarantor of the LLC on paper, Sable's lawyers are arguing that you orchestrated the robbery to hide the assets before the court could seize them." Caden looked at me, his expression grave. "Priya, the judge didn't just issue a protective order for your wages. He issued a bench warrant for Derek and Natalie for contempt of court and destruction of evidence. But because your name is on the LLC, the judge also flagged your passport. You can't leave the state." I looked at the stamped folder on the desk. The legal system wasn't a scalpel, it was a meat cleaver. And right now, I was still on the chopping block with them. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text from an unknown number. "We're at the cabin." The message read, "The bank changed the locks, but Derek broke a window. He says he's not leaving until you drop the lawsuit. Come alone, or he's going to burn it to the ground." I stared at the screen, the harsh white glare of the text message reflecting in the dark glass of Caden's office window. I didn't feel a sudden rush of adrenaline. I didn't feel the urge to jump in my car and speed down the I-5 to play the hero in some twisted standoff. I just felt a profound, heavy disgust. Derek wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was a cornered frat boy throwing a temper tantrum with my grandfather's property. I didn't reply. I just turned the phone around and slid it across the desk. Caden leaned forward. He read the message. He didn't gasp or widen his eyes. His expression simply flattened into a mask of pure, absolute professional lethality. He reached for his desk phone and hit a speed dial button. "Luz," Caden said, his voice dropping into a register I hadn't heard before. "Get me the dispatch number for the Deschutes County Sheriff's Office in Oregon. Then pull the federal asset freeze injunction and the King County bench warrant. We need to email them to the Oregon authorities in about 2 minutes." He hung up and looked at me. "You are not going to Oregon. You are not replying to that text. You are going to sit right there while we let law enforcement do what they are paid to do." He's crazy enough to actually lie light a fire, I said, my voice finally wavering. He's watching his entire life collapse. He'll burn it down just so nobody else can have it. He's bluffing, Caden said smoothly. People like Derek only destroy things when they think there are no consequences. The moment the flashing lights show up, he'll fold like wet cardboard. He sent this text to extort you across state lines. That's a federal offense. He just handed us the rope. Luz buzzed in with the number. Caden put it on speakerphone. A dispatcher answered, and Caden immediately identified himself, providing my name as the property owner. He stated clearly that there was a trespasser at the cabin, that the man was currently subject to a federal asset freeze and an active bench warrant in Washington state, and that he had just issued a written terroristic threat to commit arson. Within 90 seconds, Caden was transferred to a shift commander named Bowen. Bowen sounded older, tired, and entirely unimpressed by the drama. We know the property, counselor, Bowen said, his voice crackling slightly over the speaker. We were out there this morning slapping a stop work order on the gate because of unpermitted excavation. You're saying the suspect is inside now? He broke a window to gain entry, Caden confirmed. He is threatening to burn the structure if my client doesn't drop a civil fraud lawsuit against him. All right, we're dispatching 2 cruisers. Stay on the line. We waited. The silence in Caden's office was suffocating. I stared at the rain lashing against the window pane, listening to the faint static-filled breathing of the dispatcher on the open line. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I kept picturing my grandfather's cedar walls going up in smoke, the heavy timber beams crashing down into the mud. I pictured Derek standing in the driveway, completely insulated by his own delusion, thinking he had won. Finally, the radio crackled. Bowen's voice came back on the line. Counselor? Miss Delacroix? Are you there? We're here, Caden said. The property is secure, Bowen reported. His tone was perfectly flat, devoid of any cinematic tension. No fire. No accelerants found on site. Suspect is in custody. He cut his hand pretty good breaking the kitchen window, and he was sitting on the floor drinking from a bottle of scotch when my deputies walked in. He didn't put up a fight, just cried and asked us to call his mother. A sharp, humorless laugh escaped my throat. Of course he did. We're transporting him to the county lockup in Bend, Bowen continued. He'll be booked on felony criminal mischief, breaking and entering, and making terroristic threats. We'll flag the King County warrant so he doesn't get released on bail here. He's going to be sitting in a cell until a judge figures out the extradition back to Seattle. Thank you, Commander, Caden said. We'll need Miss Delacroix to sign a formal complaint for the property damage, Bowen added. I'll have a deputy email the forms. Have a good evening. The line clicked dead. Caden leaned back in his chair and folded his hands behind his head. Well, that solves the Derek problem for the immediate future. He's in the system. The extradition alone will take weeks. He's completely isolated. And Natalie? I asked. Natalie is currently a ghost, Caden said. But she won't stay quiet for long. Her husband is in jail, her store is empty, her accounts are frozen, and she has an active warrant out for her arrest. She's going to get desperate. He was right. It didn't take long. I left Caden's office at 6 o'clock, utterly drained. The adrenaline crash hit me the moment I stepped into the back of an Uber. I watched the city lights smear across the wet windows, my phone sitting heavy and silent in my lap. I was dreading going back to my apartment. I kept expecting to see my parents sitting in the lobby again, armed with more forged apologies and desperate ultimatums. But the lobby was empty. I made it up to my floor, unlocked my door, and locked the deadbolt behind me. I didn't even turn on the lights. I just sank onto the sofa in the dark and closed my eyes. An hour later, my phone buzzed. It wasn't a text. It was a voicemail notification. My phone had automatically sent an unrecognized, blocked number straight to voicemail. I stared at the notification icon. I knew exactly who it was. I hit play. Priya. Natalie's voice was a frantic, breathless whisper. She sounded like she was standing outside in the wind. Priya, you have to pick up. Please. I know you're mad. I know I messed up. But you have to call off the police. They arrested Derek in Oregon. He gets one phone call, and he called me and said they're treating him like a violent criminal. She paused, taking a ragged breath. The polished, arrogant CEO from the Tahoe cabin was completely gone. Priya, you don't understand, she pleaded. It was his idea. The LLC, the loan, the cabin, all of it. Derek said it was just a loophole. He said you owed us because you have so much, and we were struggling. I didn't want to use your social security number, but he made me. He said he would leave me if the boutique failed. He manipulated me. Priya, you have to tell the judge it was all Derek. If you drop the charges against me, I'll testify against him. I'll give them whatever they want. Just don't let them arrest me. Please, call me back. The message ended. I sat in the dark, the silence rushing back into the room. She was throwing him to the wolves. Less than 4 hours after her husband was handcuffed in a cabin he tried to steal, Natalie was offering him up on a silver platter to save her own skin. He manipulated me. The lie was so transparent it was almost insulting. Natalie had always been the architect of her own entitlement. Derek was just the eager contractor. They were perfectly matched parasites, and now they were turning on each other to survive. I forwarded the audio file directly to Caden. I didn't even type a message with it. He would know exactly what to do with a recorded confession of conspiracy. I finally stood up, walked into the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. I needed to sleep, but my mind was spinning like an engine stuck in the red. My life had been hijacked, and even though the hijackers were crashing, I was still strapped into the passenger seat. The next morning, the reality of the legal mess crystallized in a small, windowless conference room at the King County Courthouse. I wore a dark blazer and sat beside Caden. Across the scarred wooden table sat Sable's legal team. There were 2 of them. The junior associate looked nervous, tapping his pen against a legal pad. But the lead attorney, a woman who introduced herself as Vesper, was terrifyingly calm. She wore a tailored suit and had the cold, calculating eyes of an apex predator who had just realized the prey she was chasing was actually bait. Caden slid a thick folder across the table. It contained the sheriff's report from Oregon, the federal asset freeze documentation, and the transcript transcript of Natalie's voicemail from the night before. Vesper opened the folder. She read in complete silence for 3 minutes. Then she closed it, folded her hands, and looked at Caden. Derek is in lockup in Deschutes County, she summarized, her voice dry. The boutique has been stripped bare by an unpaid contractor. The LLC accounts hold exactly $0. And the sister is currently a fugitive offering to turn state's evidence against her own husband. Correct, Caden said, which means your client's $70,000 in inventory is gone, and the people who stole it are effectively judgment-proof. My client, Miss Delacroix, is a victim of identity theft. We have the IP logs proving the signatures were executed from a different location while she was out of the country. If you proceed with the garnishment against her wages, we will not only win in court, but we will countersue your firm for malicious prosecution. Vesper didn't flinch. She just looked at me. Miss Delacroix, I apologize for the aggressive tactics. My job is to make my client whole. Derek provided a sworn affidavit stating you were hiding assets. I acted on the evidence provided. He committed perjury, I said softly. Clearly, Vesper agreed. She turned back to Caden. I will file the motion to formally withdraw the wage garnishment this afternoon. Your client's employment is no longer our concern. A massive weight lifted off my chest. My job was safe. My rent money was safe. I let out a breath and leaned back in my chair. However, Vesper continued, her tone shifting slightly. She pulled a single sheet of paper from her briefcase and placed it on the table. Sable is still out $70,000, and my firm does not walk away empty-handed. Caden frowned, sitting forward. You can't squeeze blood from a stone, Vesper. Natalie and Derek have nothing left. I'm aware, Vesper said, which is why we ran a deeper background check on the IP addresses you provided in your initial motion to dismiss. She tapped a manicured fingernail against the paper. The Comcast residential network used to forge the LLC documents and the personal guarantee. It's registered to an Arthur Delacroix. My blood ran cold. I stared at the paper. My parents' house, I said. Yes, Vesper said. And according to your own timeline, the identifying documents used to secure this fraudulent credit line, the social security card, the birth certificate, were physically located inside that house, in a safe controlled by Arthur and Helen Delacroix. They didn't sign the papers, Caden argued, though his voice lacked its usual bite. He saw exactly where she was going. It doesn't matter, Vesper replied. Arthur and Helen Delacroix provided the physical location, the internet network, and the identifying documents that facilitated a massive commercial fraud. Under the state's civil conspiracy statutes, that makes them accessories. They enabled the theft. She looked directly at me. Her expression wasn't malicious. It was just business. Your parents own a 4-bedroom home in Bellevue. Free and clear, Vesper said. Arthur has a very healthy corporate pension. They have assets. I am filing a civil RICO lawsuit this afternoon naming Arthur and Helen Delacroix as co-conspirators in the fraud. We will place a lien on their home until Sable is repaid in full plus legal fees and punitive damages. The silence in the room was absolute. I looked at Caden. He didn't argue. He just gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Legally, she had them. My parents had spent my entire life shielding Natalie from the consequences of her actions. They had literally opened the door and handed her the tools to destroy me. And now, the bill for 30 years of enablement had finally come due. They didn't know the extent of it, I heard myself say. I wasn't defending them. It was just a fact. They thought she just took out a small bridge loan. Ignorance is not a defense against negligence, Vesper said, packing her documents back into her briefcase. They harbored a fraud. Now they get to pay for it. She stood up, buttoned her suit jacket, and offered Caden a curt nod. I'll copy you on the withdrawal of the garnishment, Caden. Good luck with the criminal side of things. She walked out, the heavy wooden door clicking shut behind her. I sat perfectly still. The irony was so thick, I could practically taste it. For 3 days, my parents had demanded I sacrifice my savings, my credit, and my grandfather's cabin to save Natalie. They had called me selfish. They had told me I was dead to them. They had tried to force me to sign a confession. And now Sable's lawyers were going to take their house. Priya, Caden said gently, breaking the silence. You are completely insulated from this now. The garnishment is dropped. You don't owe Sable a dime. The bank knows the mortgage is fraudulent. You are legally clear. But my parents are going to lose everything, I said. They are going to face the consequences of their own choices, Caden corrected. Do not let them drag you back in. When they get served with that lawsuit, they are going to panic. They are going to come to you. No, I said, my voice hardening. They won't. I'm dead to them. Remember? I left the courthouse and walked out into the crisp, damp Seattle air. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the pavement dark and smelling of ozone. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I had a new email from Arlo at work. The subject line was just a thumbs-up emoji. The HR department had received notice that the garnishment was canceled. I was in the clear. But Caden was right. The panic was coming. It started at 4:30 p.m. I was sitting at my kitchen counter, finally eating a real meal, when my phone rang. The caller ID said Arthur Delacroix. I let it ring. It went to voicemail. 2 minutes later, it rang again. Helen Delacroix. I let it ring. Then came the texts. They flooded in. A rapid-fire sequence of pure, unfiltered terror. Priya, pick up the phone. Please. A woman just came to the door. A process server. We are being sued for $1 million. They are trying to take the house. Priya, they said we helped Natalie steal from you. We didn't. We didn't know what she was doing. Call your lawyer. Tell him to stop them. We don't have the money to fight this. Priya, your father is having chest pains. Please answer. I read the texts, feeling a strange, hollow detachment. It was like watching a movie about someone else's life. 5 days ago, I would have panicked. I would have called my bank, transferred funds, hired them a lawyer, and stepped in to fix it. I would have absorbed their crisis and made it my own, just like I always did. But the woman who did that died in a Tahoe cabin when her father told her she was unacceptable. I set the phone down and took a bite of my food. The phone buzzed again. Priya, I am begging you. We are going to lose our retirement. Derek won't answer his phone. Natalie's phone is disconnected. Rejected. We have no one else. I picked up the phone. I opened the message thread. I typed slowly, making sure every word was perfect. You share her success, I wrote. Consider me gone. I hit send. Then I blocked both of their numbers. I spent the next 2 days meticulously untangling my life from the wreckage. Caden filed the final paperwork with the FTIC, officially voiding the fraudulent mortgage on the cabin. The bank absorbed the loss, recognizing it as a systemic failure on their end to properly verify the guarantor. Grandpa's property was safe, though it would take months to repair the damage Thad's excavators had done to the foundation. But I didn't care about the foundation. I cared that it was mine. On Thursday morning, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered cautiously, assuming it might be the FBI agent Jasper, following up on the federal case. Priya? The voice was thin, reedy, and vibrating with an anxiety so intense it sounded like a guitar string about to snap. It was Natalie. Where are you? I asked, my tone flatter than concrete. I'm at a motel in Tacoma, she whispered. Priya, I have $50 to my name. My cards are all declining. The manager says I have to check out in an hour. Why are you calling me? I asked. Because Mom and Dad won't answer, she sobbed. I called them yesterday from a payphone. Mom picked up. She was screaming. She said they're being sued because of me. She said Dad changed the locks on the house. She told me to never call them again. Priya, they abandoned me. I closed my eyes. The sheer, staggering narcissism. She had forged their signatures, used their home as a staging ground for federal fraud, put their retirement on the chopping block, and she felt abandoned. They didn't abandon you, Natalie, I said. You burned their house down to keep yourself warm, and now you're mad that they won't let you sleep in the ashes. Please, she begged, her voice cracking. Just send me $100 on Venmo, just so I can get a bus ticket. I need to get out of the state. If the police find me, they're going to arrest me for the store. The police already know about the store, I told her. Caden gave them your voicemail, the one where you confessed to the conspiracy and tried to blame Derek. The FBI has it. The state prosecutors have it. And I'm pretty sure Derek's court-appointed lawyer in Oregon has it by now. There was a dead, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of traffic humming in the background of her cheap motel room. You gave them the voicemail? She whispered, the panic replaced by a cold, dawning horror. I'm reporting identity theft, I quoted myself, perfectly calm. I told you that on Sunday. You ruined my life, she hissed, the victim act finally dropping, revealing the venom underneath. You spiteful, boring little bitch. You couldn't stand that I was actually doing something with my life. You couldn't stand that I was a CEO and you were just a keyboard monkey. You did this to me. Goodbye, Natalie, I said. I'll make you pay for this. She screamed into the phone. I'll tell them you knew. I'll tell them you were in on it. Good luck, I said, and hung up. I didn't block her number. I called Caden's office immediately and spoke to Luz. I gave her the phone number Natalie had just called from and told her to pass it along to the King County Sheriff's Fugitive Task Force. They could ping the cell tower in Tacoma and pick her up before checkout time. I spent the weekend cleaning my apartment. I scrubbed the floors, washed the windows, and threw away a box of old photos from family vacations that I had kept in the back of my closet. I didn't want any trace of them in my space. On Monday morning, I logged into my morning stand-up meeting for work. Arlo smiled when I joined the video call. My team treated me exactly the same. The crisis had passed over my professional life like a dark cloud, raining briefly before moving on. I was safe. At noon, I took a walk down to a local cafe to grab a sandwich. As I was waiting for my order, my phone buzzed. It was an email from Caden. Subject: case updates. I opened it while standing in line. Priya, Caden wrote. 2 things. First, the King County Sheriff apprehended Natalie at a bus station in Tacoma on Thursday afternoon. She is currently in county lockup awaiting arraignment on multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and grand larceny. Bail was denied due to flight risk. Second, Vesper's firm officially filed the civil RICO suit against your parents this morning. I spoke with a colleague who specializes in defense for that kind of litigation. Your parents hired a cut-rate attorney who is already trying to settle. They are going to have to liquidate Arthur's pension and take out a massive equity line on their home just to cover Sable's damages and Vesper's legal fees. They are financially decimated. You are completely clear. The FBI considers you a cooperative victim. Your frozen accounts should be released by the end of the week. Let me know if you need anything else. I read the email twice. I looked at the words financially decimated. I looked at the words bail was denied. I paid for my sandwich, walked out of the cafe, and sat on a bench overlooking the Puget Sound. The water was a deep, churning gray, speckled with whitecaps from the incoming wind. I thought about the Tahoe cabin. I thought about the iced tea clinking in my mother's glass while she watched me get extorted. I thought about Derek's expensive fleece vest and Natalie's self-made CEO launch party. It was all gone. The illusion of the perfect family had shattered, leaving nothing but sharp edges and debt. They were in jail cells and lawyers' offices, turning on each other, tearing each other apart for scraps. And I was sitting on a bench in Seattle, eating a sandwich, with perfect credit and a peaceful, quiet life. My phone buzzed again. It was a calendar reminder. I had scheduled a call with a contractor in Oregon for tomorrow morning. Not bad. A reputable, licensed builder who specialized in historical restorations. I was going to fix Grandpa's cabin. I was going to repair the foundation, replace the broken window, and spend the summer there. Alone, I locked my phone, put it in my pocket, and watched the ferries cut through the gray water. The wind off the water was biting, but I didn't pull my coat tighter. I just let it hit me. It felt clean. 3 months later, the Bellevue house went up for auction. I didn't hear it from them. I didn't hear it from anyone in the family because there was no family left to speak of. I heard it from Caden. We had kept in touch, moving from a strict attorney-client relationship to something resembling mutual respect over occasional afternoon coffees. He forwarded me the public listing with a simple note: Vesper doesn't mess around. I clicked the link. There it was. The house I grew up in. The colonial with the wraparound porch and the mature oak trees in the front yard. The listing photos were stark and empty. The custom furniture furniture my mother loved was gone. The Persian rugs were gone. The fireproof safe in the master closet, the one that started all of this, was just a dusty square outline on the hardwood floor. They had lost the civil suit. Sable's lawyers had systematically dismantled my father's retirement accounts and forced the sale of the house to cover the $70,000 in damages, plus the exorbitant legal fees. Arthur and Helen Delacroix were in their late 60s, financially wiped out, and renting a 2-bedroom apartment in a dreary suburb of Tacoma, just to be close to the county jail where their golden child was awaiting transfer to a state facility. Natalie took a plea deal. 5 years, eligible for parole in 3. The prosecutors didn't have to work hard. They just played the voicemail she left me, where she tried to throw Derek under the bus. Derek, in turn, took his own plea deal for the wire fraud and the forgery in Oregon, completely turning on Natalie in his sworn statements. They destroyed each other for reduced sentences. A match made in heaven. I closed the real estate listing on my laptop. I didn't feel a rush of vindication. I didn't feel sad, either. I just felt a profound, heavy emptiness. It was the feeling of setting down a weight you've been carrying for so long that your muscles have forgotten how to rest. I shut the laptop and looked around. I was sitting at the kitchen table in Grandpa's cabin. The smell of fresh pine and wood glue hung in the air. Outside the window, the newly installed, double-paned window that replaced the one Derek had smashed, I could hear the rumble of a diesel engine. My contractor Dorian was packing up his truck. He was a quiet, meticulous guy in his 50s who had spent the last 2 months undoing the butchery Thad's crew had inflicted on the property. I walked out onto the porch. The afternoon sun was catching the ripples on the lake, turning the water into crushed silver. "That's the last of it, Priya," Dorian said, wiping grease off his hands with a rag. "Foundation is secured, grading is fixed, and the retaining wall is up to code. County inspector signed off this morning. You're fully permitted and solid." "Thank you, Dorian," I said. "I really mean it." He nodded, tossing the rag into the bed of his truck. "It's a good piece of land. Solid bones. Just needed someone to actually take care of it instead of trying to tear it apart." He didn't know the whole story, just the vague outlines of a family dispute over the property, but his words hit harder than he realized. "Yeah," I said softly. "It just needed some care." I watched him drive his truck down the gravel path, the sound of the engine fading into the dense Oregon woods, until there was nothing left but the wind rustling through the cedars and the soft lapping of the lake against the wooden dock. I walked down the sloping lawn to the water's edge. The air here was entirely different from Seattle. It was thick with the scent of wet earth and pine sap. I stepped onto the wooden dock. It swayed slightly under my weight, the old pylons groaning a familiar, comforting sound. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a calendar notification. Today was my mother's birthday. For 30 years, this day meant panic. It meant buying an overpriced gift, showing up to a restaurant I couldn't afford, and sitting quietly while Natalie commanded the table and my parents footed the bill with money they had borrowed from me the month before. It meant swallowing my pride to keep the peace. I looked at the notification. I swiped left. Delete. The screen went black. I sat down on the edge of the dock and dangled my feet over the water. A pair of mallard ducks paddled lazily near the reeds. The sun was warm on my shoulders. I had a healthy savings account. I had a job I was good at. I had a cabin that belonged to me, free and clear. But most importantly, I had a boundary. A thick, impenetrable wall built out of hard truths and legal filings. They used to call me the easy one, the boring one, the safety net. I smiled, the expression feeling completely alien and entirely mine. The safety net was gone, and I had never felt more secure.